I think my key takeaway would be not to copy paste everything. Well, it doesn't mean that because you use a strategy on an English only website, in iGaming especially, it will work. If you use the same strategy in some other market, especially where either the English language is not so popular, for example, in Asia or in Africa or in South America, because they have Spanish as a major language. So you would need to take into consideration more local authority mentality than just copy pasting one strategy and just hoping that it might work. So you need to take into consideration all these things about culture, about regulation that we talked about, and so on. Hi David, how are you? I'm Nikolas Monti-Potsolakis, and this is SEO in 2026.
Nicholas, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one tip for SEO 2026, since our topic is about iGaming, is companies need to keep SEO relevant and part of their strategy. Because the iGaming industry, is growing annually across all continents. It shouldn't just be part of your as a campaign, but it should be part of your infrastructure as a company, because it will still remain the number one growth despite all the LLMs, AIs, applications, and all these things. SEO is still relevant and should be still relevant if you want to grow your company and succeed in 2026, especially in iGaming, which is very regulated the market industry.
Yeah, so we're talking about iGaming. It's a great example, as you say, is a very regulated market as well. It'll be interesting to dive into what SEOs need to do differently to be a success in that market. And obviously, people can take examples from this and use in other regulated type environments as well, and perhaps compare against what they're actively doing successfully in other markets. So firstly, iGaming. What is iGaming?
iGaming essentially is the online equivalent of a brick and mortar casino, if you'd like to compare, and also of a sports betting company, which basically does everything online. So if you want to bet, for example, for your favorite team, let's say Arsenal, Manchester United, I'm supporting Arsenal. You cannot take it off from the from the last video, but if you want to bet on one of the teams, you do it online. You don't have to go to the store or to the brick and mortar locations. And also, if you like casino, you don't have to go to the actual casino. You just need to play online, slots or whatever game, or poker, or whatever is your game of preference.
So you mentioned regulation at the start. Is it also about what is legal and not legal to do in certain countries as well, in terms of what you can focus on?
Yes, partially. There are different regulations in different countries, like you said. For example, I know that some countries like Poland do not allow online casino, whereas, for example, Czech Republic, where I'm based, you have online casino. So this is just an example. So there are a lot of things like this, especially when you're looking into a global market with different types of cultures, different regulations. You have different platforms which are engaged. So, for example, you have to consider that Google is one of the major platforms in SEO, of course, like it has always been, but it's not the king everywhere. So, for example, in Russia you have Yandex. In Korea you have another search engine, which is Naver, or you have TikTok and Reddit, which is also part of discovery in terms of search, especially for younger generations who started to gamble because they're adults now. So you have to consider which platform is available where, and also what is legal in terms of both the products, so either casino or sportsbook, or what you can do in terms of who you can target. Some countries ban gambling completely, especially Southeast Asia. I know that many countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, they banned it. So, there are a lot of offshore casinos online, which is a different entirely strategy that you would apply as opposed to a normal regulated casino, which operates in Europe or America or other countries.
Okay, so you have to be very focused on what products you can focus on in different countries, and obviously what ages and whether or not you can actually even market in different countries. But in terms of actively operating in that arena of iGaming under heavy regulation, what are some of the key differences between being an SEO in that industry versus other industries?
I think that the one part of the regulation, of course, is usually more heavily regulated than other industries, which can also give you an advantage, though, because you have, for example, channels like PPC, which is not allowed to have ads in some markets like Romania or other European markets. So you, as an SEO, you have to take advantage and rely and do more work, basically, because you don't have that relationship with PPC that you would have in other markets. So in terms of your infrastructure, SEO plays a more important role. There are also rules like, for example, if you're using link building, which is one of the popular tactics that you can use in SEO. In iGaming, it's a little bit more tricky because of the nature of the industry. So it's harder to find regular or relevant publishers. It's harder to actually convince people to to pay them to give you links, as opposed to a normal, like, I don't know, travel or hospitality or other industry, even though they are competitive. Because it's gambling, usually either they ask for more money or there are things like this that prevent you from doing your tactics as you would do them otherwise with normal SEO for another industry.
And what about entity optimization? Is it still worthwhile trying to appear in the knowledge graph, knowledge panels?
Yes, of course. It's very important, especially now that you have new features or in the search, like you said, the knowledge graph, or you have AI overviews from Google, or you have other platforms now, for example, with ChatGPT, that many people want to, or now everyone wants to be on ChatGPT. And basically, this means that you don't have to optimize for crawlers only anymore. You have to optimize for machine interpretation. So in terms of entity, you need to use schema markup, for example, which is still relevant as before, to reinforce your entity. You just need to shift your focus to write more answer-first content instead of just blabbing about the topic and showing off that you know something about the topic. You need to optimize for feature snippets still. You need also to consider a localized app store, metadata and screenshots if you have an app in a local market. So all this together, you create like entity approach based on the brand that you have, and you want to reinforce your brand because it's also one of the most important factors still in SEO, and it will be in 2026.
Okay, and in terms of building authority and demonstrating that you're a greater authority than other players in the same niche, I guess that can be a challenge as well. Perhaps you go about doing it by enhancing your entity optimization, but there are probably other ways to do it as well. Because I think you touched upon the challenges with link building in this sector is probably there are a limited number of websites that are willing to provide links, and perhaps many players are chasing the same links from the same website. So it's tougher to differentiate what you do. So what are a few other ways that you actually go about demonstrating that you're an authority or the authority within the niche?
So it's not just about ranking anymore. It's about being at the source and being quoted. So again, it's mostly about what type of content that you publish and how do you publish it.
What type of content works really well at the moment?
They're more like question like. So basically to answer questions similar to the people also ask. For example, is this gambling, is this iGaming operator legal in this country, for example? This type of question which people are looking for, and also to make it more conversational, like we're having a conversation now, instead of just writing an article or an essay like we would have at school. It should be more conversational for the user, so that gets picked up easier from especially from LLMs and all these AI overviews and all this type of content. And especially if you have an affiliate website in iGaming, which relies heavily on content, and they got hit hard by Google in the past few years. This is very important to keep in mind, that you should have more this type of content than just having articles and stuffing it with keywords and so on.
And what about using user-generated content? Because I would imagine that users want to take videos of them playing various games. Is that something that is as prevalent in iGaming as an online gaming platform?
It is. It is relevant in terms of what country might appeal to. So if you have, for example, an influencer or the actual people, like you said, that want to take a video and upload it somewhere. There are some cultures or some countries, like I know Indonesia for a fact, that they like to be on their phone all the time and upload videos on TikTok or wherever. So that would relate in that market. But in some markets, they don't want to show off, they don't want to show their face, they don't want to be involved. Maybe they, in terms of user-generated content, maybe they would like to comment, but they would do it anonymously on Reddit or platforms like that. So again, I think it has to do more on the culture and what platform that appeals to. So for example, Reddit, because it's more anonymous, and it's not only about anonymity and finding answers to your questions. I think it's also one platform that gives you kind of a verification, if you'd like. So just to make sure that, for example, what you had in your head about iGaming or what question you had, other people have it as well, so you're not crazy in a way. So again, depends on the platform, I think, and the culture and what mostly reasons with them.
And what about AI search engines? Are people using AI search engines in order to get recommendations for iGaming?
But still, the revenue growth is much, much bigger in SEO, purely SEO. So you still get more money, and the market share is still lower from LLMs. So you don't get much traffic from LLMs like ChatGPT, but that's because they provide exactly a different type of reasoning. So they give you the answer directly, so people don't seem fit to click anywhere because they get the answer that they wanted directly. So this is more like an impression-based model than click-based model, which you had on SEO. So this would be like a channel for you to take advantage because you would get mentioned as a brand. So if, for example, brand plus questions are important because your brand would be mentioned and people will remember you, and then at some point eventually, if they wanted to interact with you and found you on Google search, they would click and continue, but they wouldn't do it so much on LLMs directly or on ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or whichever they are using. It's more about information.
Do you see that changing? Because certain industries are using ChatGPT, other AI search engines more prominently as well. So is this something that's likely to change, or is this something that's more industry centric and that iGaming is less likely to use ChatGPT to find a result?
I don't think it is less likely. I think it's, for now, at least there's not much. No, there's not much. I will rephrase it. The LLMs don't take advantage as much of iGaming because of its nature with regulation and all this. It's like more like the black duck or the black swan in the family. But for example, I know that ChatGPT enables some features that you can, for example, buy some products e-commerce from e-commerce sites directly from ChatGPT, which is not something they have done with iGaming. So I think they're focusing for now more on other niches, but later on, I think eventually it's very possible that we will see something similar. So, for example, people would be able to play maybe even directly from LLMs or go to their favorite slot directly in the search. They wouldn't be visiting the website. I think it's more like it will happen very soon. Yeah.
So if you get a new iGaming client, what are a few initial things that you analyze to see what they're doing at the moment? And what are a few things that you pick up on that they're not doing very well? Perhaps things that used to work well, but are detrimental to their SEO success in 2026?
So first, I would like to ask them if they are planning to do an expansion, where. So I would need to know if they're planning to expand, if we're talking about global SEO especially. Are they aiming to do revenue diversification, or do they want to capture new demand? Because, for example, a regulation changed in some markets, so they saw an opportunity to enter that market. So these are things that we would need to establish, and also some of the most important things are the resources. So do they have the actual resources to enter that market, for example, to create localized content, to have people that understand the culture and the regulation. These are things that a brand or a client needs to have in mind when they want to expand globally and enter some other market. And also take into consideration local preferences, what the domain strategy would be. For example, if you have, let's say, an affiliate website that it's called onlinecasino.com, and you're targeting only English-speaking markets, and then you need to create like the equivalent translated version in Spanish or in Italian or in French. These are all things that you need to go talk to with the client, and if they have the capacity to do it, because okay, it's an idea that they say I want to go to this market because of XYZ reason, but do they actually have the capacity to do it? So it's about building resources, building the team that you would need, and all these things that you need to take into consideration with a client before doing anything.
Nikolas, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I think my key takeaway would be not to copy paste everything. Well, it doesn't mean that because you use the strategy on an English-only website, in iGaming especially, it will work. If you use the same strategy in some other market, especially where either the English language is not so popular, for example, in Asia or in Africa or in South America, because they have Spanish as a major language. So you would need to take into consideration more local authority mentality than just copy pasting one strategy and just hoping that it might work. So you need to take into consideration all these things about culture, about regulation that we talked about, and so on.
Nikolas Monti-Potsolakis is founder and CEO at Black Lantern Marketing. He's also an international SEO consultant. Find out more over at nmpconsulting.co. Nikolas, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. You finally mastered my name as well.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.